Pokémon. I love it. I've played the games, I've battled with my friends, and as a kid who was born in 1991, I was the perfect age to enjoy Pokémon when it took the world by storm near the turn of the millennium. However, an aspect that's bothered me more and more as time passed by has been the direction in which these Pokémon designs have gone in. So, before I got ahead of myself, I decided to ask my followers on Twitter to participate in a poll. The question I asked: what generation of Pokémon had the best designs? With the options being Gens 1 and 2, Gens 3 and 4, Gens 5 and 6, or Gens 7 and 8. These were the results, with almost 80% voting for the first 4 generations. And if you look in the comments section, primarily the first 3. But why is that? Why do people have an affinity for the older designs and not the designs of the latter half of the series? Is there a legitimate truth behind their preference? Or is it just nostalgia? Today I want to explore the designing principles that made Pokémon famous in generations 1 and 2, to explain where I think they're going wrong in the more recent games, and to try my hand at redesigning the latest generation of starters in the classic style. Let's dive in. This is the design for the fire starter Charmander in Generation 1 of Pokémon. And this right here is the design for Generation 8's fire starter Sugimori. That is quite a difference. But how did this happen? Well, it's sort of a long story, but I'll keep it short. In Generation 1, there were 4 Pokémon design artists, but only 2 of those were character artists. The rest were just programmers who did designs on the side. In Generation 2, they hired 4 additional dedicated artists, 2 of which having worked for the company before drawing the trading cards, but were employed as monster designers for Generation 2. This brought the character design team up to 8. In Generation 3, an additional 5 more dedicated artists were hired to the company, bringing the total of designers up to 13. Generation 4 saw a large exodus of 6 people leaving the company, 3 of which that were present during Generations 1 and 2. In response to this, Game Freak hired 6 new dedicated artists for the team to bring it back up to 13. For Generation 5, an additional 5 more people left the company. However, with increasing demands for more characters to be created, 10 new hires were made, creating the largest team to date for Generation 5 at 18 character designers. By Generation 6, 3 more people had left the team and 4 more were hired on, bringing the total up to 19. And finally, for the production of Generation 7, 6 more people left the team and 8 new were hired, bringing the total character designers on the team up to 21. And of those 21, only 3 remained from the original 8 hires in Generations 1 and 2. But who were the original artists that worked on the original generation of Pokémon? Well, to help me on this Pokémon journey is my good friend Tom, a legally registered Pokémon master in literally every single game released.
I'm here to eat ass and chew bubblegum. And I'm all out of ass.
What?
Ken Sugimori was one of the 2 founding members of Game Freak alongside series creator and my fucking boy Satoshi Tajiri. Back when Game Freak was just a magazine, he used to handle the art side of things, so we sort of wound up being the chief artist for the Pokémon franchise when it first started, and remains so today. Sugimori found himself responsible for designing all the human trainer characters, as well as Pokémon like Ivysaur, Venusaur, Blastoise, Pidgey, Spearow, Fearow, fucking all of these guys, and also Gengar. Gengar was his favourite.
If you look closely at his early designs, he really liked to implement tough-looking features to his characters. The fur is distinctly jagged, the claws are pronounced, and the texture conveyed with the watercolors is gorgeous. Now, you may have noticed we said in some respects he was the chief artist for Pokémon, and that's because figuring out who did what in the early Pokémon games is a rather difficult enterprise. But why was that?
See, at the time the design team was pretty small, with just these 3 absolute lady killers, so they all had multiple jobs to do to meet deadlines. One such a lady killer, Koji Naruto, said we didn't have enough people, so job categories were all jumbled up, and we would really do whatever. And that he would make resources within the game, and programmers would make designs as well. Except he probably said it all Japanesey. A prime example of such multitasking was by Shigeki Morimoto. Fucking nailed it, first take. He was a game designer and programmer, but he also helped design some of the series' favourites, such as Floordix, Floordix again, Gay Charizard, Actually Just a Cat, Actually Just a Cow, Actually Just Your Mam, and Mew. Making up the 3rd and final member of the Pokémon design team was... nope. The only thing I really know about him was that he designed Eevee as well as Jolteon and Flareon, which are some of my favourites. Fun fact, I used to be that kid who never evolved as Eevee because of that one episode in the show. But then one time when I was playing Pokémon Silver, my Eevee evolved into an Umbreon all by himself. And I thought that my love for my Eevee had literally created a new Pokémon, and and he's been my favorite ever since.
With that said, for the most part, it's not clear who designed what Pokémon, and that's because largely each design was a combined effort of 2 or more artists. Now, that's not to say one can't identify who drew what, it's actually quite easy if you know what to look for, but more on that later. At this point, the first Pokémon games were in the middle of being designed, and when looking at his current roster of designed Pokémon, Sugimori noticed an area where they were lacking. He said, and I quote, "Pokémon, as its Japanese title Pocket Monsters suggests, is a game in which monsters battle each other. At the time I figured that since they were monsters, they should have a tough look, but midways through I thought, I'd like some cute ones too. There weren't many designers in the company at the time and I was doing most of it. That is why I asked one of our female staff, like Atsuko Nishida, to join. The decision to design more cute Pokémon was made. In addition to wanting people to battle with their Pokémon, they wanted to encourage trading also, and to do so needed greater variety in the designs on offer. And so, once tasked with creating some cute monsters as the 4th and final member of the original art team for Pokémon, Atsuko Nishida went right to work designing many Pokémon, including the Oddish, Bellsprout, Poliwag, and Ponyta lines, all the starters for the first generation, and one that would ultimately become the mascot for the series. Pikachu.
Fascinating. Ooh, foreshadowing. What's interesting is that when the games are being localized for a Western release, they actually changed some of the sprites to make them look less like the unfortunate result of a sex crime. Sprite work was tough back in the day because the Game Boy could only display a whopping total of 4 pixels at any given moment. The designs, colours and poses had to be kept pretty basic if you wanted them to be recognisable, and even then they were pushing their luck sometimes. The original 151 were designed with these kinds of hardware limitations in mind. Sugimori said, "The Game Boy didn't have colour. That's why we made the colouring something that could be easily expressed in black and white."
It's precisely for reasons like this that Charmander was given a spike in his back and Pikachu was given stripes there too, to help break up the colour scheme so that when the back sprites were shown in the games, they were easier to recognise with the limitations of the old game's sprite art. However, the red and green illustrations for sprites weren't the only ones given to Generation 1. No. Enter red and blue. The various artists dedicated to sprite and illustration could diverge and explore more interesting posings independently, which led to better sprite art overall and much better illustrations. Why do I think these designs were so great? They emphasized that these were creatures, wild animals that you can venture out into the wilderness to find. These revised designs for red and blue looked as though they were sketches of wild creatures from a biologist's journal. They aren't posing for the camera for the most part, they are either attacking it in a defensive position or looking off elsewhere. Character creatures, not toy adverts. Pocket monsters, not pocket toys. And that's really what made Pokemon cool and fun for a lot of people, including myself, that grew up with the games.
Generation 2 follows a similar design philosophy, probably because most of them were either leftovers in Generation 1 or designed almost immediately after and with the same core team present. From all the interviews we came across during the research of this video, this one quote in particular by Ken Sugimori stood out as somewhat telling. He said, "I didn't think the series would continue for so long. I figured there might be a part 2 and that would be it." Yeah, so he didn't exactly hit the nail on the head with that one. Because of the success that cute Pokemon like Pikachu had found, Game Freak's design team decided to double down on that angle. As the series went on, things like sharp teeth, fur, claws, and overall edge took a backseat in favour of more rounder, friendly, cute and soft designs.
And on top of that, despite having the biggest teams working on the designs to date, Generation 6 and 7 produced the least amount of new Pokemon to the series. That said, I would imagine there needed to be more artists for the later games as they shifted into the 3D space. However, once the anime found success and Pikachu took the world by storm, I personally think that the design team decided to hedge their bets on the cute factor more and more as time went on. And so, the somewhat realistic, more creature-based design theory was thrown out in favor of softer, rounder, more cartoonish design principles. But this is where it gets interesting. In an interview from 2018, Ken Sugimori, still the art director for the series, was recanting a survey he gave to the folks around him before the release of Red and Green. He said, "I printed out the complete pixel drawings of the Pokemon and asked people which Pokemon do they like best. The overwhelming winner of this survey was Pikachu. The reason for this survey was to sort out which Pokemon would appear in the game given its limited capacity." Now, the context context of this statement was an interview discussing the creation of Pikachu and the success the character found, implying that even before the game was released, Pikachu was capturing the hearts of those that saw it. However, in an early interview taken with Shigeki Morimoto, one of the 4 original members of the design team and creator of Pokemon like Dragonite and Mew, had this to say. We had a poll in the company once a long time ago to see which Pokemon was the most popular, and back then the winner was Executor. Now, this statement doesn't conflict with Sugimori's necessarily. There could have been many polls taken during that time, for various reasons, but what I found interesting is that it doesn't seem to follow the cute is always best school of thought that seems to dominate the modern designs. And what's more is that survey couldn't have happened recently either, because Shigeki Morimoto left the Pokemon team after Generation 3. So, after all this talk, how would I fix this? How would I bring the latest starters from the 8th generation into a similar design philosophy to Generation 1? Let's start with who I think is the biggest victim and example of the new design philosophy. Scorbunny. Now, believe me, I thought this would be a simple enterprise. I would just take elements from the original designs and substitute it into the new Scorbunny design. So that's what I did originally. I made a list of design elements from Generation 1 I thought might fit with the design, but the more I did this, the more I realized I had to change the character entirely. I couldn't keep his face as flat as it appeared, I couldn't use the cheek puffs, I couldn't even use the ears. And trust me, I tried as many different ideas and posings as possible, and none of it worked. So at that point, I decided to take a step back and start from scratch, and study some real rabbits, which ultimately led me to this design. I decided that this was the right direction to go in and built upon that, trying out tons of different designs, asking friends their opinions, ultimately finishing with this. My Generation 1 Scorbunny design. I tried to mimic the sharp, jagged fur Sugimori would use to communicate the fire element of his design. I kept the overall white color of the original while giving him a more realistic head shape with buck teeth, while of course making it appear like a journal sketch of a wild animal, not posing for the camera. I implemented the exact same design philosophy for Sobble and Grookey to achieve the same effect.
When artists were creating the first 151 Pokemon, they were drawing from childhood experience and interests, taking reality, adding some imagination, and voila, Pokemans. Personally, I think that's what's largely missing from the modern designs. Things feel less handcrafted and more factory produced. You know Diglett? Yeah, that's actually basically just a character that Morimoto made up when he was a kid. He even used to draw flipbooks of him. And now his childhood doodles are recognized and loved all across the globe. Isn't that fucking magic? Look, Mark and I are all but certain that there isn't a discussion happening behind Game Freak's closed doors, and it's difficult to fault them for that. Pokémon has been one of the most consistently successful gaming franchises over the last 2 decades. But, and this is probably just my nostalgia talking, I kind of feel like the spirit of what made Pokémon look like Pokémon has been replaced by plastic imitations. It almost seems like they've missed the point of what Pokémon had been established to be as in the first 2 generations, he said, pre-ordering a copy of Sword and Shield.
To make myself clear, this is by no means a jab at the anime's redesign for smoother animation. I am a massive fan and advocate of that practice for animation specifically. I'm speaking purely about the design principles behind the current generation of Pokemon themselves. Designs that look like they fit in more on a store shelf than in the actual world, living and breathing. I don't expect this will change. And why should it? Game Freak's Pokemon is one of the most lucrative properties in today's market. One that, in order to stay relevant, needed to evolve with the times. And that's understandable, but a part of me just wishes that a consequence of that evolution wasn't a de-evolution of design. Thanks for watching. Oh, also, if this wasn't enough Pokemon for you, you could check out part 2 of this video on Tom's channel, where he and I break down the in-game components that make up the Pokemon series. It's well worth the watch, and he makes some terrific content. See you next week, guys!